Hello and welcome to the class. My name's Paddy. Today, we're going to be talking about part one of the speaking test. If you have any questions after you watch this class, you can click on the chat icon at the top of your page here. If you click on that icon, you will be able to send us a message with any questions that you have. This is the first class of 2 classes, and this video will last around 20 minutes. First, we're going to talk about topics to expect in part 1 of the speaking test. Then we're going to look at how to deal with not hearing the question and giving yourself time to speak. So by the end of this class, you will be more aware of how to answer part 1 questions. During this class, there will be some questions for you to answer. You can find these below the video. I will tell you when you need to answer these questions, and I'll give you about 10 to 15 seconds to answer them. Okay, let's get started. So what can you expect in part 1 of the speaking test? In part 1, the examiner will be asking you questions about you, your life, your experiences, your opinions, and your interests. This is in contrast to part 3, where the questions are more global discussion questions. They're a little bit deeper. So in part 1, be prepared to talk about yourself. They're the kind of questions that you might get in a conversation between you and a friend, for example. Part 1 usually lasts for around 4 to 5 minutes. In this time, you will get maybe 10 questions. The register of your language in the exam is more informal. So imagine that the examiner is a person that you've just met at a party and they're asking you some questions about your life. So you should be friendly, informal, and chatty. You should be polite, but not too formal. Your replies to the question should be long enough to give some detail. So a short answer like, yes, I do, is not enough to get you the marks. One sentence is enough to answer the question, and then you should add some extra information if possible. So 1 to 3 sentences is something to aim for. Now let's look at some common topics for part 1. Part 1 will usually start with some questions about your current life. So are you studying? Are you working? What's your job? What do you study? So you should be prepared for those questions specifically. After this, you will get questions on a topic. The topics include your home. So a question like, which room do you spend the most time in at home? Questions about your hometown are also common. So be prepared to talk about the place where you live, things you like, things you dislike. Like, what places would you recommend to tourists in your hometown? So when you're preparing, think of some features of your town. Entertainment and culture. This includes things like books, movies, and TV shows. For example, do you think music is important? This is an opinion question, and you can give a more global answer, but keep it personal as well. Talk about your own feelings about music. The internet is an increasingly common topic. For example, how often do you go online? Do you use social media? Sport and exercise. So in this area, we might get questions like, what is the most popular sport in your country? What do you do to keep fit? Do you do any activities? Do you have any sporting hobbies? Food is another topic that people love to talk about, and you can expect this in part 1 as well. So questions like, do you often eat fast food? What are some local dishes from your culture's cuisine? Work or studies. So they might ask you about your studies in particular. Why did you choose to study engineering, for example? What do you like about your job? Again, these are typical conversation questions you might get from anybody you meet. Shopping is another one. Do you ever buy anything online? How often do you go shopping? What are your habits? What are your routines? Family and friends. So what kind of things do you do together as a family? They might ask you about your family or who you're friends with. Health and lifestyle. So they might talk about your diet, how often you exercise, things like this. Remember, all of these questions you can talk about globally, but you need to bring it back to yourself when you're speaking. Now I'm going to show you some questions. I'd like you to think about whether these are part 1 questions or not. A. How do you usually spend your evenings during the week? B. What steps can we take to reduce our CO2 emissions? C. What is the capital city of Australia? D. Is it better to grow up in the city or the countryside? E. Who are you closest to in your family? F. Does TV have a harmful influence on children? G. How are you doing? And H. Do you work or study? Look at the first question below this video and decide which of these are part 1 questions. There are 4 correct options. Question A is a part 1 question. How do you usually spend your evenings during the week? During the week, I usually spend my evenings watching TV or playing video games. Sometimes I see my friends, but I don't usually stay out very late. See, a short answer with a few extra questions. It's about me, my life, and my routines. B, what steps can we take to reduce our CO2 emissions? This is more of a part 3 question. It's about global advice for combating climate change. It's a much bigger topic than you would expect in part 1. C, what is the capital city of Australia? You would never see a question like this in the speaking exam. They're not going to test your knowledge. They're going to be asking open, opinion-based questions. D, is it better to grow up in the city or countryside? This is a kind of question you might get in part 1. It's a global question, but you can personalize it. For example, I think it's better to grow up in the city because I really enjoy being close to things like cinemas and shops. The countryside is great, but it can be a little bit boring. My answer is very personal. I'm not talking globally. E, who are you closest to in your family? This is a part 1 answer. It's talking about you and your family. For example, I'm probably closest to my brother. I think we're pretty similar and we both have the same interests. He taught me a lot about music. That's an example answer. F, does TV have a harmful influence on children? This is an opinion question, but it's much more global. You're not going to relate it to yourself so much, so it's more of a part 3 answer. G, how are you doing? This is something you might say to your friends, but the examiner is probably not going to ask you this question. I imagine the answer would always be, I'm a little bit nervous right now. H is a question you would get at the start of part 1. They will almost always ask you this. So for example, I work, I'm a teacher. I've been teaching for about 10 years now. Many students often worry that they're not going to understand what the examiner is asking them in the exam. Now, part 1 questions are usually quite simple and quite common. If you prepare before the exam by thinking of some topics and predicting those questions, you should be pretty well prepared and have a good idea of what to expect. You generally won't face any surprises. But when the examiner does ask you a question, you don't have to answer that second. It's okay to take a little bit of time, prepare yourself, and then give an answer. A pause of a few seconds is absolutely fine. A long hesitation will affect your mark, however. It's also okay to ask for repetition. If you didn't understand the question or if you didn't hear the question, it's okay to ask the examiner to ask it again. It's good to have some phrases and expressions so that you're prepared to do this. Here are 4 possible phrases you could use to ask the examiner to repeat themselves. Which of these is not good to use in the exam? Look at the next question below this video and choose the option which is not good to use in the speaking exam. These are all good phrases to use except for B. Repeat, please, is a little bit too direct and short. It's not very polite. A is good. I'm sorry, could you repeat that, please? C, would you mind saying that again? D, sorry, I didn't quite catch that. All of these would be appropriate. Now, the examiner won't explain the question and they won't give you help with any of the language, but they will be happy to repeat themselves. If you don't completely understand the question and the examiner has already repeated themselves, then the best thing you can do is try to give an answer related to the topic. Remember, they're marking your language, so if your answer doesn't perfectly match the question, you can still get marks. Here is a question that you didn't hear properly. You can see that many of these words are not heard correctly, but there are a few words that you did hear while you were listening. If you get a question like this, where you don't understand everything, you should try to give an answer. So let's think about what would be a good answer when you don't hear this question. Look at the next question below this video. There are 4 options for how you could answer this question. 1, say what you do to keep fit and healthy. 2, talk about the sports you did when you were at school. 3, describe the food you eat every day. And 4, say why you think eating healthily is more important than doing exercise. So from the words in this misheard question, what do you think would be a good thing to say in response? Choose the correct option. So from the words that we did hear in this question, I would say why I think eating healthily is more important than doing exercise. So that's option number 4. The words opinion, important, healthy, diet, and exercise tell me that I probably need to talk about diet and exercise, and it's about the importance of staying healthy. So my answer could relate to those somehow. In this case, the question was, in your opinion, which is more important for staying healthy, a good diet or regular exercise? So if your answer connects to that in some way, then it's still a good answer. Saying nothing cannot get you any marks, so saying something is always better than saying nothing. If you prepare for the exam by practicing common questions, you shouldn't be surprised by any of the questions in part 1. But sometimes they will ask you a question that maybe you've never thought about before, and you need a little bit of time to think of some points to make in response to the question. It's good to learn some phrases to give yourself time to introduce your answer. I'm going to show you those phrases. A, that's an interesting question. B, I would say that. C, let me think for a second. D, E, I don't really know. F, I'm not entirely sure, but G, what I would say is H, it depends on. 2 of these phrases are not so good to use in your answer. Look at the next question below this video and choose the 2 options which you should not use to give yourself time to think. So the 2 phrases I would not use are D, or E, I don't really know. Is a little bit of a long hesitation. A short hesitation like, I've never thought about that before, that's fine. But a long, doesn't sound very good. E, I don't know or I don't really know is not a good response to the question. Even if you have no opinion, you should always try to answer it. A good way to do this would be option F. So I'm not entirely sure, but, and then you give an answer anyway. Remember, the examiner is not marking you on the actual content of your answers. They don't care about your opinion, they just care about the quality of English you use to express that opinion. As well as these phrases, we can also use some filler phrases to start your answer. So, well, I suppose, we can use these to give ourselves a little bit of extra time. Let's look at some examples of how we can do that. So the examiner asks us, are there a lot of things for young people to do in your hometown? Now, I've never really thought about this question before. So I'm going to say, well, I guess I'm not entirely sure because I'm a little older, but I suppose I would say that we have some places that are popular with teenagers, like the cinema or the shopping centre. Notice how I've made my answer a bit longer, but all of this English is very natural. It's the kind of thing I would say if somebody asked me a question that I'd never thought about before. It's a good idea to learn as many of these as you can so that it doesn't sound rehearsed or forced in the exam. So what makes a good answer? How long do we have to speak for? Too short, and we're not giving enough content to get good marks. Too long, and the examiner is always going to be interrupting us. I'd like you to think about when would be a good place to stop. Here's an example question. The examiner asks us, are you into cooking at all? So, do you like cooking? And I'm going to say no. Now, this is not enough, so we need to extend our answer. I'd like you to think about how far should we extend our answer. Look at the next question below this video. When I finish my answer, I would like you to decide the 2 possible correct places to stop speaking. So when I finish my answer, choose the 2 correct options. No, I'm not a big fan of cooking in general, as I find it boring having to spend so much time chopping vegetables and things like that. I prefer eating out at restaurants, even though it's a bit more expensive. Also, my husband is a very good cook. In fact, he does most of the cooking in my house. I tried to learn from him, but I found it frustrating. What I find difficult is following the recipe and not burning the food. Now, choose the 2 correct options. If you speak at a normal speed, you could stop after it's a bit more expensive. So here I have answered the question, I've given a reason for my answer, and I've given a comparison. So I prefer restaurants. This is absolutely fine for an answer. Maybe if you speak a little bit faster, you could add more information. Also, my husband is a very good cook. In fact, he does most of the cooking in my house. I tried to learn from him, but I found it frustrating. Here is where you should probably stop. So we've already said quite a few sentences here. You don't want to go on for more than 20-30 seconds. So before the exam, try to practice by giving answers of 2 to 3, maybe 4 sentences. That is the end of the class. Now it's time to watch class 2 and then do the extra training and practice activities on this topic. Remember, if you have any questions, you can click on that chat icon at the top of your page. Send us a message with any questions that you have. Thank you for listening.